I stared at my reflection in the elevator's polished doors, watching droplets of fever sweat roll down my temples. The report folder trembled in my hands as the numbers on the display ticked upward toward the executive floor, 38.9 degrees Celsius. And I was about to face Eleanor Price, a woman whose cold demeanor could probably cure my fever or finish me off entirely. My name is Cassidy, and this was the moment everything in my life started to unravel. The elevator dinged, and I stumbled into the pristine hallway of Price and Partners Advertising. The fluorescent lights made my head swim as I made my way toward the conference room, where I could already hear Eleanor's precise, cutting voice through the glass walls. "Where is she?" This presentation was scheduled for 9 sharp. I pushed open the door, immediately feeling 12 pairs of eyes lock onto me. "I'm so sorry for the delay. Miss Nolan." Eleanor's voice could freeze hell over. She sat at the head of the table, her silver hair perfectly coiffed, designer glasses perched on her nose like weapons aimed at my career. "How kind of you to finally join us. Though I suppose punctuality is merely a suggestion these days." "I apologize, Mrs. Price. I've been fighting a fever, but I have the complete report ready." "A fever?" She arched an eyebrow. "Well, isn't that convenient? Just like the family emergency that delayed last month's campaign launch." My cheeks burned hotter than my fever. That family emergency had been my sister's miscarriage, but I wasn't about to share that detail with Eleanor Price. I fumbled with my presentation materials, trying to focus as the room tilted slightly. If I could just pull up the quarterly numbers. "Oh, I've already seen them," Eleanor interrupted, holding up her tablet. "Marcus was kind enough to email them to me last night. Your work, I believe, though submitted through his account." Marcus, that backstabbing little. I glanced at my colleague, who suddenly found his coffee cup fascinating. He'd asked to review my report yesterday, claiming he wanted to provide feedback before the big presentation. "I'm afraid these numbers don't tell the story we need them to tell," Eleanor continued, her voice dripping with false concern. "Perhaps if you'd spent more time on analysis and less time on whatever else occupies your attention, we'd have something worth presenting to the board next week." The room started to spin. I gripped the back of a chair, my knuckles white. "Mrs. Price, I can explain." "Can you? Can you explain why our biggest client's campaign metrics are underperforming? Or why 3 junior copywriters have requested transfers from your team in the past month?" "That's not..." I swayed slightly and someone gasped. Through my blurring vision, I saw Eleanor's lips curl into something that might have been a smile. "Miss Nolan, you look unwell. Perhaps you should take the rest of the day to recover. We can discuss your future with the company when you're feeling more capable." I opened my mouth to protest, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, I turned and fled, barely making it to the elevator before my legs gave out. As the doors closed, I caught a glimpse of a man rushing toward me, tall, concerned eyes, expensive suit. But the doors had already sealed shut, leaving me alone with my humiliation and the realization that my career might be over. What I didn't know then was that the man by the elevator was Ethan Price, Eleanor's son, and that this moment of complete professional destruction would lead me down a path I never expected. One that would teach me that karma isn't just a concept, it's a promise. But first, I had to survive this fever. And then I had to figure out how to survive Eleanor Price. 3 days after my humiliating breakdown, I was nursing a coffee at the bean counter when someone slid into the seat across from me. It was him, the man from the elevator. Up close, his concerned eyes were even more striking, a warm brown that seemed to carry genuine kindness. "I hope I'm not interrupting," he said, setting down his own coffee. "I'm Ethan. I saw you at Price and Partners the other day, and I wanted to make sure you were okay." I wrapped my hands tighter around my mug. "Cassidy. And I'm fine. Just a fever that picked the worst possible moment to spike." Eleanor Price has a talent for making bad moments worse. His mouth quirked into a half-smile. "I've seen it happen more times than I can count." "You work there too?" "No, thank God." He chuckled, then hesitated. "But I know the company well enough." "Listen, what happened in that meeting? It wasn't about your work." Eleanor's been particularly ruthless lately because she's losing control of the Morrison account. My head snapped up. "What? But that's impossible. Morrison's been with Price and Partners for decades. Things change. People change. Ethan's expression darkened momentarily. Sometimes the facade starts cracking, and people see what's really underneath. A group of businessmen entered the cafe, their loud conversation filling the space. One of them glanced our way, did a double take at Ethan, then quickly looked away. Interesting. So I said, studying him. You seem to know a lot about Price and Partners for someone who doesn't work there. Let's just say I have a complicated relationship with the company. He leaned forward, his coffee forgotten. But I'm more interested in hearing about you. What made you choose advertising? For the next hour, we talked about everything except Eleanor Price. Ethan was easy to talk to, genuinely interested in my stories about campaign disasters and creative breakthroughs. When he laughed at my terrible industry jokes, something warm settled in my chest, replacing the knot of anxiety that had lived there since the meeting. I should get going, I finally said, gathering my things. I have a meeting with Human Resources tomorrow about my future at the company. Wait, Ethan pulled out his business card. If you need anything, advice, a friendly ear, or just someone to share coffee with, call me. I took the card, my fingers brushing his. Thanks, but I'm not looking for. I know. His smile was gentle. But everyone needs allies, especially when facing Eleanor Price. Later that night, I finally looked at his card. Ethan Price, financial analyst at Morgan Stanley. My stomach dropped as I Googled his name. Photos popped up, Ethan at charity galas, business functions, and there, in an old Society page article, Eleanor Price, CEO of Price and Partners, with her son Ethan at the annual Advertising Excellence Awards. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Dinner tomorrow? I promised to explain everything. Ethan. I stared at the message, my mind racing. Eleanor Price's son had sought me out. Was this a trap? Some elaborate scheme to humiliate me further? Or was he genuinely trying to help? Another text came through, no agenda, no strings. Just dinner and honest conversation. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. The smart thing would be to delete his number and stay far away from anything connected to Eleanor Price. But something about Ethan felt different, genuine in a way his mother never was. Okay, I typed back. But you're buying, and I want the full story. His response was immediate. Deal. And Cassidy? Thank you for giving me a chance to explain. I set my phone down, wondering if I'd just made the biggest mistake of my career or stumbled onto something that could change everything. Either way, tomorrow's dinner would reveal whether Ethan Price was truly different from his mother, or if the apple had landed right at the base of that poisonous tree. 6 months into dating Ethan, I found myself standing in Eleanor Price's marble-floored foyer, clutching his hand like a lifeline. The engagement ring on my finger felt impossibly heavy as Eleanor's gaze fixed on it, her expression shifting from confusion to something darker. Mother, Ethan said, his voice steady but tense. We wanted to tell you in person. Eleanor set her wine glass down with deliberate precision. How unexpected. Though I suppose I should have seen this coming when you kept appearing at company events together. We weren't trying to hide anything, I said, fighting to keep my voice level. We just wanted to be sure before announcing your relationship with the CEO's son to the entire company. Eleanor's smile was razor sharp. How considerate. Though I must say, your recent promotion to senior creative makes much more sense now. The blood drained from my face. That promotion was based on my work with the Morrison account. Of course it was, dear. Eleanor turned to Ethan. And you're certain about this arrangement? Mother. Ethan's warning tone carried years of unspoken tension. I'm simply concerned. Eleanor moved closer, her designer heels clicking against the marble. After all, office romances can be so complicated, especially when they involve different levels of the corporate hierarchy. My promotion. She was going to make everyone think I'd slept my way to the top. The realization hit me like a physical blow. Actually, I said, my voice surprisingly steady, I've been meaning to discuss my position at the company. Both Ethan and Eleanor turned to look at me. I'll be submitting my resignation tomorrow. I've accepted an offer from Davidson and Mills. Eleanor's eyebrows shot up. Have you now? Cassidy. Ethan started, but I squeezed his hand. It's the right move, I said. For everyone. Eleanor's laugh was like breaking glass. Oh, darling. Davidson and Mills? I had lunch with James Davidson just yesterday. Fascinating how he never mentioned hiring you. My stomach dropped. The offer letter on my phone suddenly felt like it was burning a hole in my pocket. In fact, Eleanor continued, swirling her wine, I believe they just filled their creative director position. Such a shame, timing is everything in this industry. The room tilted slightly. I'd signed the contract 2 days ago. Had calls scheduled for Monday to meet my new team. What did you do? Ethan's voice was dangerously quiet. Nothing, darling. I simply had a friendly conversation with an old colleague about the importance of professional integrity. Eleanor's smile never wavered. We can't have people thinking positions are being handed out based on personal relationships, can we? You had my offer rescinded. The words felt like ash in my mouth. I protected my company's reputation. And yours, though you may not see it that way. Eleanor stepped closer, her perfume suffocating. Did you really think you could use my son to advance your career without consequences? That's enough. Ethan moved between us. You've gone too far this time. Have I? Ask yourself why she never mentioned your connection to Price and Partners to her new employers. Ask yourself what else she might be hiding. I backed away, my engagement ring catching the light. Everything I'd worked for was crumbling, and Eleanor Price stood in the ruins, sipping wine like she was watching a mildly interesting play. We're leaving, Ethan said, guiding me toward the door. And Mother? This isn't over. No, Eleanor agreed, her voice following us out. It's only beginning. In the car, Ethan's knuckles were white on the steering wheel. We'll figure this out. I have contacts, I can make calls. Don't you see? I whispered. She'll always have more power, more connections. She'll never stop. Then we'll stop her. Ethan's voice was steel. Together. But as we drove away from Eleanor's mansion, my phone buzzed with an email from Davidson and Mills, formally rescinding their offer due to unforeseen circumstances. And I realized that taking down Eleanor Price would require more than just determination. It would require becoming as ruthless as she was. The question was, could I do that without losing myself in the process? The Morrison account files sat heavy in my bag as I rode the elevator to my floor at Price and Partners. After Eleanor's sabotage of my job offer, I'd spent 2 weeks debating this moment. My resignation letter burned a hole in my pocket, but these files, they were my insurance policy. Marisol caught me before I reached my office. Cassidy, thank God. Eleanor's called an emergency meeting. Morrison's threatening to pull their entire portfolio. My stomach dropped. What? Why? Numbers aren't adding up. Someone leaked internal documents showing we've been padding engagement metrics. Marisol's eyes were sharp. Eleanor's out for blood. The conference room was a war zone when we entered. Eleanor stood at the head of the table, her usual composure cracking around the edges. Miss Nolan, she said, voice dripping acid. How convenient that you're here. Would you care to explain why Morrison received an anonymous email detailing discrepancies in their campaign metrics? Every head turned toward me. I felt the weight of the files in my bag, remembered the copies I'd secured off-site. I wouldn't know anything about that, Mrs. Price. No. She slid a paper across the table. Because these numbers match the reports you prepared last quarter. Reports that only 5 people had access to. Mother. Ethan's voice cut through the tension as he entered the room. This isn't the way to handle this. Eleanor's face went white. What are you doing here? Protecting my fiancé from another one of your witch hunts. He moved to stand beside me. We both know those numbers were manipulated long before Cassidy joined the company. The room went deadly quiet. I watched Eleanor's fingers tighten around her pen until her knuckles went white. Everyone out, she ordered. Except you 3. She pointed to Ethan, Marisol, and me. As the room cleared, Marisol spoke up. The Morrison account has been doctored for years, Eleanor. We all know it. Careful, Marisol, Eleanor warned. Loyalty has limits. Yes, Marisol agreed. It does. She pulled out her phone and played a recording. Eleanor's voice filled the room, clearly instructing someone to adjust the engagement metrics. Eleanor's mask slipped completely. You recorded me? In my own company. I recorded you ordering me to commit fraud, Marisol corrected. 3 years ago, when you first started losing control of the account. My hand found Ethan's under the table. This wasn't just about my career anymore. This was about years of manipulation and lies. What do you want? Eleanor's voice was ice. Your resignation, Ethan said quietly. Step down gracefully, mother. Before this gets worse. Eleanor laughed, a harsh, brittle sound. You think you can threaten me? In my own company. She turned to me. You did this. Turned my son against me. Corrupted my most trusted director. No, I interrupted, finally finding my voice. You did this. Every manipulation, every lie, every person you've crushed to maintain control, it's all coming back around. Get out. Eleanor's voice shook. All of you. And Cassidy? Consider yourself terminated. Actually, I pulled out my resignation letter. I quit. But don't worry. I'm sure the Morrison team will be very interested in my exit interview. As we left the conference room, Eleanor called out, Ethan, if you walk out that door with her, you'll what? He turned back. Destroy my career too? Cut me off? Go ahead. Some things are worth losing everything for. In the elevator, Marisol finally spoke. You know she won't stop. She'll try to destroy all of us. Let her try, I said, thinking of the evidence we'd gathered, the allies we'd made. She's not the only one who knows how to play the long game. The elevator doors opened to the lobby, and I stepped out feeling lighter than I had in months. Eleanor Price had taught me well. Sometimes the best revenge isn't about destroying someone. Sometimes it's about letting them destroy themselves. But as my phone buzzed with an unknown number, I realized this was just the beginning of a much bigger war. The rejection email from Hawthorne Creative stared back at me from my phone screen, the 5th one this month. Each one followed the same pattern. Enthusiastic interviews, verbal offers, then sudden radio silence followed by polite rejections. They all lead back to her, Ethan said, watching me from our kitchen counter. Mother's making sure every agency in the city knows not to hire you. I set my phone down harder than necessary. She can't blacklist me forever. Can't she? He ran a hand through his hair. A gesture I'd learned meant he was holding something back. Cassidy, there's something you should know about the Morrison account. Before he could continue, my phone lit up with a text from Marisol. Turn on channel 8 now. The TV flickered to life just in time to catch Eleanor Price, immaculate as ever, addressing a room of reporters. Allegations of fraudulent reporting are completely unfounded. Price and Partners maintains the highest standards of integrity. She's spinning it, I whispered. She's actually going to get away with it. These accusations stem from a disgruntled former employee who was terminated for poor performance. My hands shook as I grabbed my laptop, pulling up my email. I have proof. The original reports, the altered numbers, everything. I could send it all to Morrison right now. Wait, Ethan caught my wrist. That's exactly what she wants. If you leak those documents, she'll have grounds for a lawsuit. She's baiting you. The doorbell rang, making us both jump. Through the peephole, I saw a courier with an official-looking envelope. Miss Cassidy Nolan? He handed me the package. You've been served. Inside was a cease and desist letter from Price and Partners' legal team, threatening action for defamation and breach of confidentiality. How did she know? I looked at Ethan. About the documents? His face went pale. I mentioned them to Marcus last week, trying to negotiate a severance package for you. I thought I trusted him. Marcus. The betrayal hit like a physical blow. The same Marcus who stole my report? You went to him. I was trying to help. Ethan reached for me, but I stepped back. Don't. My voice cracked. Just don't. My phone buzzed again, another text from Marisol. Eleanor's calling an emergency board meeting tomorrow. Something big is happening. Then a second message. She's selling the company. What? Ethan grabbed his own phone, scrolling rapidly. She can't. The board would never. Unless she's found a buyer who'll protect her interests, I said slowly. Someone who'll maintain her version of events and make sure the truth stays buried. The pieces clicked together. Eleanor's media appearance, the legal threat, the timing of it all. She wasn't just trying to silence me. She was orchestrating her exit strategy. There's more, Ethan said quietly. The trust fund she set up for me? It's tied to company shares. If Price and Partners changes hands, you lose everything. The weight of it settled over us both. Eleanor had outmaneuvered us again, threatening not just my career but Ethan's financial security. My laptop dinged with a new email from an address I didn't recognize. The subject line read, regarding Eleanor Price, open alone. Don't, Ethan warned. It could be another trap. But I was already clicking. Inside was a single line: "If you want the real story about Eleanor Price, meet me at the Grand Hotel Bar, 8 p.m. Richard Price. Your father." I looked at Ethan, whose face had gone completely still. Why now? Because he knows something we don't. Ethan's voice was tight. Something that could either save us or destroy everything. I stared at the email, then at the legal notice, then at Eleanor's face still playing on the TV screen. We were running out of options, out of time. "I'm going," I said. "Whatever your father knows, whatever Eleanor's hiding, it's our only chance." Ethan nodded slowly. "Then we go together." "But Cassidy," his eyes met mine. "Be careful what you wish for. The truth about my mother. It might be worse than you imagine." The Grand Hotel Bar was nearly empty when we arrived, except for a silver-haired man nursing a scotch in the corner. Richard Price looked exactly like the photos I'd seen. Distinguished, weathered, with Ethan's kind eyes. But there was something else there too, a heaviness that spoke of long-buried secrets. "You shouldn't have come," were his first words to us. "Eleanor has people watching." "Let them watch," I said, sliding into the booth. "I have nothing left to lose." Richard's laugh was bitter. "That's what I thought 20 years ago. Before she took everything." "What do you mean?" Ethan asked, his voice tight. "You left us." "That's what Mother always said." "Is that what she told you?" Richard pulled out a worn leather portfolio. "Your mother didn't just push me out of the company, son. She orchestrated my complete destruction. And she used the same playbook she's using on Cassidy." He spread out documents across the table. Old contracts, letters, news clippings. My hands shook as I recognized the pattern. Systematic isolation, professional sabotage, carefully crafted lies. "The Morrison account wasn't the first time she doctored numbers," Richard continued. "She's been doing it for decades. I threatened to expose her, so she..." The bar's lights suddenly blazed to full brightness. Eleanor Price stood in the doorway, flanked by two men in suits. "How predictable," she said, walking toward us. "The disgraced husband returns to poison my son against me." "Mother," Ethan started. "Don't bother, darling. I saw this coming the moment you chose her over your family." Eleanor's smile was glacial. "Richard, I suggest you leave before I have security remove you. And those documents you're so eager to share? They're inadmissible, covered by the NDA you signed 20 years ago." Richard's face went pale. "You wouldn't." "Try me." She turned to me. "Miss Nolan, I'm feeling generous. Walk away now from the company, from these ridiculous allegations, from my son, and I'll ensure you find work elsewhere. Perhaps even overseas." "You're trying to buy me off?" I stood, anger burning through my fear. "After everything you've done, I'm offering you an exit strategy. More than I gave Richard." Her eyes flicked to the portfolio. "Those documents prove nothing except that some people can't accept failure gracefully." "You ruined my life," Richard said quietly. "No, dear. You ruined your own life by crossing me." Eleanor snapped her fingers, and the security guards moved forward. "Now, I believe this meeting is over." "Wait." Ethan's voice cut through the tension. He was staring at something in the portfolio. "These dates. The Morrison account adjustments. They match the company's founding dates." Eleanor's composure cracked, just for a moment. "The company was never yours to begin with, was it?" Ethan continued. "It was Dad's. You stole it from him. I built that company into what it is today." Eleanor's voice rose sharply. "Your father would have run it into the ground with his outdated principles and weak leadership. So you fabricated evidence of embezzlement," Richard said. "Made me look like a criminal to the board. And now you're doing the same to me," I realized. "Because I found proof of your fraud." Eleanor's laugh was hollow. "Proof? Look around, dear. I own this city's advertising world. Who would believe you over me? Who would dare?" She reached for the portfolio, but Ethan snatched it away. "I would. And so would the FBI's Financial Crimes Division." The color drained from Eleanor's face. "You wouldn't dare." "Try me," Ethan echoed her earlier words. "Unless..." "Unless what?" "Unless you're ready to negotiate." His voice was steel. "Starting with Cassidy's career and ending with Dad's reputation." Eleanor's eyes darted between us, calculating. For the first time, I saw fear beneath her perfect mask. But as she opened her mouth to respond, her phone buzzed. The message she read made her smile return, slow, triumphant. "Actually," she said, "I don't think I'll be negotiating anything. The board just approved the sale. By this time tomorrow, Price and Partners will belong to someone else, along with all its records, accounts, and evidence of any irregularities." She turned to leave, then paused. "Oh, and Ethan? Check your trust fund. I think you'll find some interesting changes there too." As she walked away, I realized we'd just lost our last chance at justice. Eleanor Price had outmaneuvered us again, and this time, she'd made sure to burn every bridge behind her. The annual Advertising Excellence Awards buzzed with nervous energy as Eleanor Price took the stage to announce the sale of her company. I watched from the back of the ballroom, Marisol's USB drive heavy in my clutch, waiting for my moment. "Change is inevitable," Eleanor was saying, "but legacy is forever. That's why I'm proud to announce that Price and Partners will be joining the Global Media Alliance family." My phone lit up with a text from Ethan. "Buyer's rep is stalling. You're clear." I slipped through the crowd toward the tech booth, where Marisol was already waiting. "Security cameras?" I whispered, looping footage from last year's ceremony. "We have 4 minutes." I handed her the drive. The presentation Eleanor had queued up was about to become very different from what she'd planned. And now, Eleanor continued, "I'd like to share a video highlighting our company's proudest achievements." The lights dimmed. Eleanor's carefully curated presentation disappeared, replaced by security footage of her threatening Richard in his office 20 years ago. The audio was crystal clear. "Sign the papers, Richard, or I'll make sure you never work in this industry again. The board already believes you're embezzling funds." "Who do you think gave them that idea?" Gasps rippled through the crowd. Eleanor froze mid-sentence, her face illuminated by the damning evidence. The footage changed, Eleanor doctoring the Morrison account numbers, then coaching Marcus on how to steal my report. Each clip was dated, documented, devastating. "Turn it off," Eleanor commanded, but the tech booth remained dark. I said, "Turn it." "They can't hear you," I said, stepping into the light. "Just like you couldn't hear me when I tried to tell you the truth about the Morrison account." "You." Eleanor's voice shook with rage. "Security. They're busy," Ethan said, joining me. Apparently, the FBI's Financial Crimes Division needed to speak with them about some interesting offshore transactions. The room had erupted into chaos. Board members were already heading for the exits, phones pressed to their ears. The Global Media Alliance representatives huddled in urgent conversation. "You think this changes anything?" Eleanor laughed, but there was hysteria in it. "I still own this company. I still control." "Actually," Richard emerged from the crowd, "you don't. The board called an emergency meeting this afternoon. Once they saw evidence of your long-term fraud, they voted to suspend the sale and remove you as CEO." Eleanor's perfect mask cracked completely. "You can't prove." "We can," I interrupted. "Every document, every altered report, every threat you made, it's all there. Your own security system recorded everything. You were so busy watching everyone else. You forgot to watch yourself." "Why?" Her question was barely a whisper. "Why go to all this trouble?" "Because you taught me well, Eleanor. You showed me that sometimes the best revenge isn't about destroying someone." I met her eyes. "Sometimes it's about letting them destroy themselves." The lights blazed back to full brightness. FBI agents were moving through the crowd now, heading for the stage. "Miss Price," one called out, "we need you to come with us." Eleanor straightened her spine, smoothed her designer dress. Even now, she was trying to maintain control. But as she passed me, she paused. "You'll become me, you know," she said softly. "Power changes people. Corrupts them. Ask Richard." "No," I replied. "I'll become something you never could. Someone who builds people up instead of tearing them down." She laughed one last time as the agents led her away. "We'll see." In the aftermath, as reporters swarmed and phones buzzed with breaking news alerts, Ethan took my hand. "You okay?" he asked. I watched Eleanor's retreating figure, thinking about power and revenge, and the fine line between justice and becoming what you hate. "Ask me tomorrow," I said, "when we start rebuilding this company the right way." But Eleanor's final words echoed in my mind, a warning or a prophecy. Only time would tell which one of us was right about power's true nature, and whether karma had finished its work or was just beginning. 1 year later, I stood in Eleanor's old office, my office now, holding a letter that had just emerged from a hidden compartment in her antique desk. The renovation crew had found it while preparing for the agency's rebranding. The envelope simply read, "To my successor." "You don't have to read it," Ethan said from the doorway. He'd been helping oversee the transition since the board appointed me CEO 6 months ago. "Yes, I do." I broke the seal, Eleanor's familiar handwriting spilling across the page. "To whoever finds this letter, you think you've won. Just as I thought I'd won when I took this company from Richard. But power isn't about winning. It's about surviving. Every decision I made, every person I destroyed, was about survival in a world that devours the weak. You'll understand soon enough. Eleanor Price." I set the letter down as Marisol entered with the quarterly reports. "Morrison's numbers are up 40% since we implemented the transparency initiative," she said. "Turns out honesty actually works better than fraud." "Who knew?" "Eleanor knew," I said quietly. "She just chose differently." The phone buzzed. Richard, calling from the lobby. Since Eleanor's conviction, he'd been instrumental in rebuilding client trust, working alongside Ethan to restore the company's reputation. "The new signs are going up," he announced when I met him outside. We watched as workers removed the last Price and Partners lettering from the building. "Having second thoughts about the name change?" Richard asked. I shook my head, watching the new logo being installed, Collective Creative Partners. "No more single names on the building," I said. "No more one person holding all the power." That's what Eleanor never understood. Success doesn't have to mean survival of the fittest. My phone chimed with a news alert. Eleanor Price had been denied early release. The accompanying photo showed her in prison gray, her perfect mask finally stripped away. "She wrote that power corrupts," I told Richard. "That I'd become just like her." "And have you?" I thought about the changes we'd implemented, profit sharing for employees, mentorship programs, collaborative decision-making. The agency was thriving not despite these changes, but because of them. "I think," I said carefully, "that power reveals who we already are." Back in my office, I found Ethan studying Eleanor's letter. "You know what's strange," he said. "Part of me still wants her approval. Even after everything." I touched his shoulder, understanding the weight of that admission. She taught us both valuable lessons, just not the ones she intended. The intercom buzzed. The Morrison team was waiting in the conference room for our strategy presentation. As I gathered my materials, I caught my reflection in the window, standing exactly where Eleanor had stood that fever-filled morning that felt like a lifetime ago. "Ready?" Ethan asked. I took one last look at Eleanor's letter before locking it away. She was right about one thing. Power isn't about winning, but she was wrong about survival. Sometimes the greatest power lies in choosing not to destroy, in building something new from the ruins of the old. "Ready?" I said, and stepped out of the office, leaving Eleanor's ghost behind. But that night, as I worked late finalizing the agency's new mission statement, I found myself opening my desk drawer, looking at that letter again. Eleanor's words about survival nagged at me, not because I feared becoming her, but because I finally understood her. Fear had driven every decision she'd made, and in the end, that fear had become a self-fulfilling prophecy. I pulled out a fresh sheet of paper and began to write. "To my successor, power isn't about survival. It's about choice. Choose wisely. Cassidy Nolan." I sealed it and slipped it into the same hidden compartment where Eleanor's letter had waited. Someone would find it someday, and when they did, they'd face the same choice I had, to build or to destroy, to fear or to trust, to survive or to truly live. The choice, as always, would be theirs.
Growing up in a middle-class family in suburban Chicago, my life was pretty straightforward. My dad, Tom, spent 30 years on the police force before retiring, and my mom, Sarah, still works as a secretary at Lincoln Elementary. They gave me everything they could, but we were never wealthy. I'm Tasha Mitchell. Well, I was before I became Tasha Reynolds. After graduating from college with an accounting degree, I landed a job at Anderson & Partners, a mid-sized accounting firm. The pay was decent, the work was steady, and I thought that would be my life. Wake up, go to work, come home, repeat. Then came that rainy Tuesday in October when I literally bumped into Marcus outside Starbucks. I was rushing to get my morning coffee before work, and he was heading to some important meeting. My coffee spilled all over his obviously expensive suit, and I wanted to die right there. "I'm so sorry," I started dabbing at his jacket with napkins. "I'll pay for the dry cleaning, I swear." Instead of getting angry, he laughed. "Don't worry about it. Though you could make it up to me by having dinner with me tonight." That dinner turned into another, and another. Marcus was different from anyone I'd dated before. He was the son of James and Victoria Reynolds, owners of Reynolds Industries, one of the largest manufacturing companies in the Midwest. But he never made me feel less than him. He loved that I came from a real family, as he called it. That all changed when he took me to meet his parents at their mansion in Lake Forest. I'll never forget Victoria Reynolds looking me up and down like I was something she'd found stuck to her shoe. "So, Tasha," she said, swirling her wine glass, "Marcus tells us you're an accountant?" "Yes, I am," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. "How practical," she said with a thin smile. "And your parents?" When I told her about my dad being a retired cop and my mom a school secretary, you'd think I'd said they were professional criminals. James Reynolds barely looked at me during dinner, speaking only to Marcus about work. When he proposed 3 months later, I said yes without hesitation. His parents attended our wedding with frozen smiles and stiff congratulations. I thought I could win them over with time. I thought love would be enough. After our honeymoon in Bali, Marcus and I moved into his luxury apartment in downtown Chicago. The place was bigger than my parents' entire house, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Lake Michigan. I felt like I was living in a dream. 2 months after we married, I discovered I was pregnant. Marcus was ecstatic, spinning me around our massive living room when I told him. Even Victoria and James seemed to soften a little at the news, though Victoria couldn't resist saying, "Well, at least the child will have good breeding on one side." Our son, James Jr., Marcus insisted on naming him after his father, was born on a snowy December morning. The moment I held him, nothing else mattered, not Victoria's constant criticisms, not the whispers at Reynolds Industries parties about the accountant who married the boss's son. JJ, as we called him, was perfect. Those first 2 years were actually good. Marcus took to fatherhood like a natural, coming home early to play with JJ, reading him bedtime stories, taking us both to the park on weekends. He was thriving as financial director at Reynolds Industries, and I worked part-time from home as an accountant while taking care of JJ and our home. Victoria and James might not have liked me, but they doted on their grandson, showering him with expensive gifts and demanding regular visits. But somewhere around JJ's 3rd birthday, things started to change. Marcus began coming home later and later, always with the same excuse, "Big project at work, honey." You wouldn't understand. The man who used to rush home to see his son now barely made it for bedtime. Then came that Thursday when Victoria showed up unannounced at our apartment, her Hermes scarf perfectly arranged, despite the wind outside. "Would you care to explain," she said, walking in without waiting for an invitation, "why you weren't at the company's annual gala last night?" I stared at her, confused. "What gala?" "Don't play dumb, Tasha. The Reynolds Industries anniversary gala. Every executive and their wife was there, except you." My stomach dropped. I didn't know about any gala. Victoria's eyes narrowed. "Marcus said you weren't feeling well." "Are you telling me my son lied?" I waited up that night, sitting in our dark living room until Marcus came home at 11:30. He loosened his tie as he walked in, stopping short when he saw me. "Why didn't you tell me about the gala?" I asked quietly. He sighed, pouring himself a scotch. "Look, Tasha, let's be honest. You wouldn't have fit in. You're too simple for these events. The other executives' wives, they know how to carry themselves. They can discuss art and wine and summer homes in the Hamptons. What would you talk about? Your dad's police stories? Your mom's adventures in the school cafeteria? I felt like he'd slapped me. I'm your wife, Marcus. You're supposed to be proud of me, not ashamed. I was proud, Tasha. When we were dating, your simplicity was charming. But I'm the financial director now. I need a wife who can be more. I went to bed crying that night, telling myself he was just stressed from work, that things would get better. But deep down, I knew something had broken between us, something I wasn't sure could be fixed. It was a Tuesday when my world fell apart. Marcus had texted that he was working late again, and I was doing my usual cleaning routine around the apartment. When I got to his home office, I noticed his laptop was open on his desk, screen still bright. I'd never snooped before, I trusted him, despite everything. But something made me pause this time. Maybe it was the way the screen showed his email was open, or maybe I was just tired of all the lies. I sat down at his desk, and that's when I saw it, an email thread with someone named Sophia Loran. My hand shook as I started reading. There were hundreds of messages between them, going back months. Sophia was apparently a new marketing executive at Reynolds Industries, hired about a year ago. As I scrolled through their correspondence, my stomach turned. Had dinner with the village idiot again, Marcus had written. God, I can't believe I have to go home to her. Sophia's response, poor baby. Don't worry, I'll make it all better tomorrow. They talked about me like I was a joke, the simple-minded wife who didn't know her husband was sleeping with someone else. There were pictures of jewelry he'd bought her, weekend trips they'd taken while he'd told me he was at business conferences. I stayed up all night, copying everything to a USB drive, printing key emails, taking screenshots. When Marcus finally came home at 7 a.m., his shirt wrinkled and his tie loose, I was sitting at the kitchen table with the evidence spread out in front of me. Care to explain? I asked, holding up one of the printed emails. How could you do this to me, to our family? He laughed, actually laughed. Come on, Tasha. Did you really think you were enough? Sophia is everything you're not, sophisticated, sexy, exciting. When's the last time you even tried to look good for me? I've been taking care of our son while you've been screwing around. Look, he said, pouring himself a coffee like we were discussing the weather, here's how this is going to work. You'll stay my wife, on paper. It's better for my image at the company. Sophia understands. And hey, he added with a nasty grin, maybe I'll even find time for you occasionally. If you're lucky. I ran to JJ's room, my hands shaking as I threw some clothes into a backpack. JJ was still sleeping, clutching his favorite teddy bear. I gently woke him up. Baby, we're going to visit Grandma and Grandpa for a while, okay? Marcus leaned against the doorframe, watching us. You'll be back. Where else could you possibly go? I picked up my son, grabbed the backpack and my purse with the USB drive, and walked past Marcus without a word. Through tears, I drove to my parents' house. Mom opened the door in her bathrobe, took one look at my face, and pulled me into a hug. The divorce papers arrived 3 days after I left. Victoria Reynolds personally delivered them to my parents' front door, wearing a satisfied smirk. I always knew you weren't good enough for my son, she said, handing me the envelope. I'm just glad he finally realized it too. But what came next was worse than anything I'd imagined. Marcus wasn't just filing for divorce, he was suing for full custody of JJ. His lawyer filed papers claiming I was an unfit mother, painting a picture of me that was completely false. Your Honor, Marcus's expensive lawyer said during our first hearing, Mrs. Reynolds has exhibited increasingly erratic behavior over the past year. She drinks heavily, creates scenes of jealousy without cause, and has become unstable. Thank God I'd saved all that evidence. When my lawyer presented the email correspondence between Marcus and Sophia, showing his infidelity and his cruel comments about me, the judge's expression changed. The timestamps on the emails proved I hadn't been creating scenes. I hadn't even known about the affair until I found those messages. So, Mr. Reynolds, the judge said, reviewing the evidence, you claim your wife is unstable, yet these emails show you were the one deceiving her, gaslighting her? Marcus shifted uncomfortably in his expensive suit. The judge awarded me primary custody of JJ, with Marcus getting every other weekend and substantial child support payments. I went back to work full-time at my accounting firm, while Mom and Dad helped with JJ. They were amazing, turning their retirement years into full-time grandparent duty without a single complaint. We settled into a routine. It wasn't luxury living anymore, but it was honest and peaceful. Then came that Saturday morning when a black Range Rover pulled up in front of my parents' modest house. Marcus stepped out, and with him was Sophia, tall, blonde, wearing designer clothes that probably cost more than my monthly salary. "I'm here to see my son," Marcus announced, pushing past me into the house. Sophia followed, her nose wrinkled as she looked around our living room with its worn but comfortable furniture. "Oh my God," she laughed, picking up one of Mom's cherished family photos. "This place is literally a dump. Like an actual kennel." "Watch your mouth," I warned her. She turned to Marcus. "Baby, you can't let your son stay in this hovel. And these old people?" She gestured toward my parents, who stood shocked in the doorway. "They belong in a ditch somewhere, not raising a Reynolds heir." "Get out," I said, my voice shaking with rage. "Both of you, get out of my parents' house right now." "Or what?" Marcus sneered. "You know what, Tasha? I'm done playing nice. I'm going to take JJ, and I'm going to destroy you." "You think you won in court? Just wait." I shoved them both toward the door. "Get out." "Come on, baby," Sophia purred to Marcus. "This place probably has fleas anyway." As they drove away, I hugged my parents tight. Mom was crying, and Dad looked like he wanted to punch something. But watching that Range Rover disappear down our street, I realized something. I wasn't afraid anymore. I was angry. The next night, Dad found me sitting at the kitchen table, staring into a cold cup of coffee. "You know, sweetheart," he said, sitting down across from me, "sometimes the best defense is a good offense. Remember Mike Sullivan? He worked with me on the force. Now he's a private investigator. Real thorough guy, knows how to dig deep without leaving traces." I thought about Sophia's smug face, about her cruel words about my parents, about all the nasty emails she kept sending me. Just that morning, she'd commented on my LinkedIn profile photo, "Look at this pathetic wannabe. Can't even afford decent clothes anymore?" Marcus wasn't any better. His latest email had read, "Every time I pick up JJ and see you in that dump, I remember why I upgraded. Enjoy playing poor with your cop daddy." "How much does Mike charge?" I asked Dad. 2 days later, I was sitting in a small office downtown with Mike Sullivan, a gruff man with kind eyes who'd known me since I was a kid. Weeks passed. I focused on work and JJ, trying to ignore the constant stream of harassment from Marcus and Sophia. Then Mike called. "You need to come to my office," he said. "You're going to want to see this in person." The file he handed me was thick. "First off," he said, "Sophia Loren isn't her real name. She's using her sister's identity. Her real name is Carla Larson." As I read through the file, my hands started shaking. Before working at Reynolds Industries, Sophia had been an escort, moving from rich man to rich man, living off their money until they got tired of her or discovered her small-time scams. She'd had different names in different cities, always disappearing just before things got too hot. But what she was doing at Reynolds Industries was far worse. "Look at these bank transfers," Mike pointed out. "She's been siphoning money from company accounts, small amounts that wouldn't raise red flags. And these emails?" He showed me screenshots. "She's been selling company information to your in-laws' biggest competitors. Product launches, merger plans, everything." I sat back, my mind racing. The perfect, sophisticated Sophia Loren was nothing but a con artist. And she'd gotten her hooks into not just my husband, but the entire Reynolds empire. "There's one more thing," Mike said, pulling out another folder. "Remember that big deal Reynolds Industries lost last month? The one that cost them millions? Sophia sold the bid information to their competitor 3 days before the deadline." I gathered all the evidence carefully, making multiple copies. But I didn't make a move. Not yet. Because now I knew something Sophia didn't. Timing is everything. The call from Victoria came on a Wednesday morning. Her voice was as cold as ever. "Tasha, James's 60th birthday party is this Saturday," she said, like she was scheduling a root canal. "While we'd prefer to keep this a family-only affair, JJ should be there for his grandfather's birthday. And since he's too young to come alone." She let the sentence hang there. "Just remember, you're only being invited as JJ's escort. Try to stay in the background and not embarrass anyone. The party starts at 7. James Reynolds' 60th birthday party was exactly as ostentatious as you'd expect. The mansion was decked out in gold and crystal, with waiters carrying champagne on silver trays. I felt every judgmental stare as JJ and I walked in. "Oh, you came," Victoria said, her smile tight. "Well, JJ darling, come give grandmother a kiss." I stood awkwardly by the appetizer table, watching my son being paraded around like a show pony. The other guests either ignored me or whispered behind their hands. I clutched my large purse containing Mike's file, waiting. Then Marcus walked in with Sophia on his arm. She was wearing a red Valentino dress that probably cost more than my car, diamonds dripping from her ears. "Everyone," Marcus announced, clinking his glass. "I have an announcement to make." He pulled Sophia closer. "I'd like you all to meet my future wife, Sophia Loren. She'll be joining the Reynolds family officially next spring." Victoria rushed forward to embrace her. Finally. A woman worthy of the Reynolds name. Harvard educated, from a wonderful family. "Unlike some people," James added, shooting me a look. Sophia preened under their attention. "I just feel so blessed to be joining such an esteemed family. And I promise to be the kind of wife Marcus truly deserves." That was my cue. I stood up, my hand steady as I pulled out the file. "Speaking of what people deserve," I said loudly, "I have a few things to share about the future Mrs. Reynolds." "Tasha," Marcus warned, "don't make a scene." I pulled out the first document. "Tell me, Sophia, or should I say Carla Larson, how's your sister feeling about you stealing her identity?" The color drained from Sophia's face. "What is she talking about?" Victoria demanded. "Oh, did she not mention that she's been living under her sister's identity? The real Sophia Loren is a schoolteacher in Minnesota. This woman," I pointed at her, "is Carla Larson, former escort and con artist." "She's lying," Sophia shrieked, but I was already laying out the evidence, photos, bank statements, police reports. "And here's my personal favorite," I continued, pulling out more documents. "Bank transfers showing how she's been stealing from Reynolds Industries. And look at these emails, she's been selling your company's secrets to Wagner Manufacturing and Collins Corp. For months." James Reynolds snatched the papers from my hands. "The Wagner deal, the Collins merger, it was you?" "I can explain," Sophia stammered, backing away from Marcus's thunderous face. "The real Carla Larson," I said, enjoying every moment, "has quite a history. 7 different cities, 7 different wealthy men, 7 different scams. Looks like Reynolds Industries was going to be number 8. The room had gone deadly quiet. I watched their faces change as they read through the evidence, Marcus's confusion, Victoria's horror, James's growing rage. And Sophia, her perfect mask cracking as her house of cards came tumbling down. The elegant birthday party dissolved into chaos within minutes. James Reynolds's face had turned an alarming shade of purple as he read through the evidence. "Get out," he roared at Sophia, who was still trying to stammer excuses. "Get out of my house before I have you arrested right here." "James, darling," she attempted, reaching for his arm. "These are all lies, I can explain everything." "Explain?" He shook the documents at her. "Explain how you cost us the Wagner deal? That contract was worth $20 million. And Collins? They were our biggest competitor, and you've been feeding them everything." Victoria, who'd been quietly reading through the escort service records, looked up with pure venom in her eyes. "You common prostitute," she hissed. "You thought you could con your way into our family?" Sophia backed toward the door, her designer heels clicking on the marble floor. "Marcus, baby, tell them." But Marcus looked like he might be sick, staring at the photos of Sophia, or Sophie, with various wealthy men over the years. "If you're not off my property in 30 seconds, James said, his voice deadly quiet, "I'm calling the police. And trust me, you'll be seeing plenty of our lawyers either way." After Sophia fled, James turned to his son. The party guests were pretending to be absorbed in their champagne, but everyone was watching. "You brought this woman into our company," James said. "Gave her access to confidential information. All because what? She was pretty? Had nice legs?" "Dad, I didn't know." "Exactly," James roared. "You didn't know? Didn't check? Just thought with your..." He glanced at JJ and modified his language, "with everything except your brain. You're fired, Marcus. Clear out your office by tomorrow." "But Dad..." "And that apartment you're living in? Company property. Find somewhere else to live." Victoria, who had been uncharacteristically quiet, suddenly turned to me. "Tasha," she said, and for the first time ever, her voice held genuine emotion. "We owe you an apology. A significant one. You saved our company from God knows how much damage." James nodded solemnly. "We were wrong about you. Very wrong. You've proven yourself more worthy of the Reynolds name than..." He glanced at Marcus, "others." 3 days later, Sophia was arrested at O'Hare, trying to board a flight to the Cayman Islands. The evidence I'd gathered, combined with what Reynolds Industries lawyers found once they started looking, was overwhelming. She was facing serious fraud charges and massive fines. Marcus, I heard, was staying at a friend's condo while he looked for a new job. No other financial firms were eager to hire a man who'd been fired for such catastrophic negligence. It's been 6 months since James Reynolds' birthday party changed everything. I'm sitting in my new apartment, not as luxurious as the one I shared with Marcus, but perfect for JJ and me. The Reynolds family gave it to me as a token of appreciation for saving their company from Sophia's schemes. "The least we could do," James had said, handing me the keys. "After everything, well, you understand. The apartment is in a nice neighborhood, close to good schools. JJ's room is decorated with superhero posters, and my little home office overlooks a park. It's not a penthouse with lake views, but it feels like home in a way the luxury apartment never did." Marcus moved to California last month. He calls JJ every Sunday at 7 p.m., like clockwork. Their conversations are short. JJ's still too young to talk long on the phone, but at least he's trying to be a father, even from a distance. He never asks to speak to me, and that's fine. Some bridges stay burned. The biggest change has been with the Reynolds family. Victoria stops by at least once a week, usually bearing gifts for JJ and, surprisingly, for me too. Last week, she brought a beautiful orchid for my windowsill. The real shock came when Victoria and James invited my parents over for dinner. I was nervous. The last time they'd all been in the same room was at my wedding, where the class divide had been palpable. But something had shifted. I watched in amazement as James asked Dad about his years on the force, genuinely interested in his stories. Victoria and Mom talked about gardening, exchanging tips about growing roses. "Sarah," Victoria said to my mom at the end of the evening, "you and Tom raised a remarkable daughter." I'm sorry we didn't see it sooner." "We always knew what Tasha was capable of," Mom replied with quiet dignity. "Sometimes it just takes others a while to catch up. Life isn't perfect. I still have days when I miss the man I thought Marcus was, when I worry about JJ growing up with a long-distance father. But then I look at my son, happy and healthy, playing with his grandparents, all his grandparents, and I know we're going to be okay." Last night, I found JJ looking at an old photo of Marcus and me from our wedding day. "Do you miss Daddy?" he asked. I sat down next to him, pulling him close. "Sometimes," I said honestly. "But you know what? Life doesn't always go the way we plan. Sometimes it goes wrong before it goes right. The important thing is to stay true to who you are. Later, as I tucked him into bed, I thought about how far we'd come. From the simple accountant the Reynolds family once scorned, to the woman who saved their company. Sometimes the happy ending isn't the one you expected. Sometimes it's better. My name is Maya Richardson, and I grew up watching my parents build their sports nutrition empire from the ground up. Some might think being born into a wealthy family meant a life of luxury and ease, but that couldn't be further from the truth. My parents, especially my father, made sure I understood the value of hard work from day one. I can still remember the first time Dad brought me to the office. I was 7, wearing my favorite blue dress with tiny flowers, trying to look as professional as a second grader could. "Maya," he said, setting me up at a small desk near his office, "one day, all of this might be yours. But you'll have to earn it, just like I did." Those words shaped my entire childhood. While other kids spent their summers by the pool, I was learning about inventory management and customer service. Mom sometimes worried I was missing out on being a kid, but I loved every minute of it. The company, Richardson Nutrition, became my second home. College flew by in a blur of business classes and internships at Dad's company. I worked in every department, starting from the warehouse up. No special treatment, that was our deal. The employees who'd known me since childhood watched with approval as I learned the ropes from the ground up. After graduation, I dove headfirst into my role at the company. My days were packed with meetings, reports, and strategy sessions. Dating? That was a foreign concept. My college roommate Sarah used to joke that I was married to my job. Everything changed at the company's annual holiday party. I was running late, as usual, having stayed behind to finish some quarterly reports. When I finally arrived at the venue, the party was in full swing. That's when I saw him, James Cooper, from our Denver branch. Tall, with warm brown eyes and an easy smile that made the exhaustion of my 14-hour workday melt away. "You must be Maya," he said, extending his hand. "I've heard so much about you." "All good things, I hope?" I laughed, accepting his handshake. "The best. Though they didn't mention you were beautiful." That night, we talked for hours. About work, about family, about our dreams. He seemed to understand me in a way no one else had. When he asked for my number at the end of the night, my heart did a little flip. After James returned to Denver, we started messaging each other constantly. Every morning started with his "good morning, beautiful" text, and every night ended with long conversations about our days. It felt like I'd known him forever. One night, after a particularly long video call, I took a leap. "Why don't you transfer to the main office? We could be together, and it would be great for your career." There was a pause on his end. "Maya, I can't. My family's here in Denver. My parents, my sister, my nephew, we're really close. I couldn't leave them." My heart sank a little, but then he added, "But why don't you come here? The Denver branch could use someone with your expertise." I sat with that thought for a day, before approaching Dad in his office. "Daddy, I need your advice. What would you think about me transferring to the Denver branch?" I watched his face carefully as I explained about James. To my surprise, Dad just smiled. "I've been wondering when you'd ask. James has a good reputation in the company, and the Denver branch could use strong leadership. If this is what you want, I'll make it happen." 2 weeks later, I was standing in James's apartment in Denver, surrounded by moving boxes. "Welcome home," he said, wrapping his arms around me. I felt like I was exactly where I should be. The first meeting with his family came sooner than I expected. They all lived together in a modest 2-story house, his parents, Tom and Linda, his sister Rachel, and her teenage son Kyle. I was nervous as we pulled up to their house. "Your family must have a mansion," Linda said the moment I walked in. "This must seem so simple to you." I felt my cheeks flush. "Oh no, not at all. We've always lived pretty normally. No mansions or private jets, just a regular house. But surely with your family's wealth, Tom started. I've worked for everything since I was a kid, I explained. Dad believed in earning your way. I'm more comfortable with simple things, honestly. I caught the disappointed looks they exchanged, but tried to ignore them. Rachel, James's sister, just looked me up and down, eyeing my simple sweater and jeans. If I had your money, I wouldn't be caught dead in anything but designer labels, she said with a smirk. I just shrugged, not knowing how to respond. James squeezed my hand under the table, but said nothing to defend me. 2 months later, James proposed during a walk in the park. It wasn't elaborate, just us, a simple ring, and a heartfelt question. I said yes immediately. When it came to wedding planning, we had our first real disagreement. James wanted something extravagant, a huge venue, hundreds of guests, all the trimmings. Babe, we don't need all that, I argued. Let's do something small and meaningful. He eventually gave in, though not happily. We had a modest ceremony with just immediate family present. But I couldn't help overhearing Linda during the reception, whispering to her sister, I expected something much grander from someone with her background. All this, it's so plain. I pretended not to hear, but their words stung more than I wanted to admit. The ink had barely dried on our marriage certificate when the questions about housing started. We were having Sunday dinner at Tom and Linda's when they brought it up. It was a typical family gathering, Rachel texting on her phone, Cal playing video games in the corner, and Tom watching sports on TV while we ate. So, Maya, Linda said, passing the mashed potatoes, have you talked to your father about buying you two a house? Something in the Cherry Creek area would be perfect. I was just looking at listings there yesterday, there's this beautiful 5-bedroom with a pool. I nearly choked on my water. Actually, we're planning to save up and buy our own place. The silence that followed was deafening. Rachel's fork stopped midway to her mouth. Tom muted the TV and turned to stare at me. Linda's face froze in that artificial smile I was beginning to recognize all too well. They exchanged loaded glances that made me feel like I'd said something terribly wrong. But surely your father wouldn't mind. Tom started, wiping his mouth with his napkin. I mean, it's just natural for parents to help their children get started. Especially when they're so capable. I cut him off firmly but politely, sitting up straighter in my chair. James and I want to do this on our own. We're both working, and we can save up. I believe in earning what you have. James reached for my hand under the table, his palm slightly sweaty. I support Maya on this, he said, though his voice lacked conviction. Besides, my apartment is perfectly fine for now. I've been renting it for years, and it's in a great location. Linda's eyes lit up suddenly, like she'd just had a brilliant idea. She set down her wine glass with a little too much force. Well, if you're staying in the apartment, Maya should pay the rent. After all, she makes quite a bit more than you do, James. It's only fair. I watched as my husband nodded in agreement, a little too quickly for my comfort. That makes sense, he said, not meeting my eyes. It's $3,000 a month. The amount took me by surprise. Denver wasn't cheap, but that seemed high for our neighborhood. Still, I didn't want to create waves. The tension in the room was already thick enough to cut with a knife. Sure, that's fair, I said, trying to keep my voice light. So our routine was established. Every month, I'd give James $3,000, and he'd handle the rent payment. Sometimes I'd see him making the transfer on his phone, always quick to close the screen if I walked by. It went on like this for a while until one day, a thought occurred to me while I was reviewing our monthly expenses. Hey, I said one evening while we were having dinner in our kitchen, the sounds of the city drifting in through the open window, since I'm paying the rent now, maybe I should take over the lease? We could put it in my name. It would make sense for tax purposes. James's reaction was immediate and strange. He tensed up, nearly dropping his fork onto his half-eaten pasta. His face paled slightly. No, that wouldn't work, he said quickly, his voice higher than usual. I've been renting from Mr. Johnson for years. He trusts me. We don't want to mess with a good thing. Something about his reaction bothered me deeply. The way his eyes wouldn't quite meet mine, the slight tremor in his hands as he reached for his water glass. But I pushed the feeling aside, like I'd been doing with so many little things lately. Life in Denver had fallen into a routine. I was settling into my role at the branch office, managing my team, and having weekly video calls with mom and dad. On the surface, everything seemed perfect. But there was one issue that kept gnawing at me. It happened for the first time on a Tuesday. I came home from work early with a headache, only to find Linda and Rachel sitting on my couch, watching my TV, eating the expensive salmon I'd bought for James's birthday dinner. "Oh, Maya," Linda said, not even getting up. "We were just having a little snack." I stood there, keys still in hand, staring at them. They had their shoes up on my coffee table, magazines scattered everywhere, and my kitchen looked like a tornado had hit it. This became a regular occurrence. I'd come home to find them there, or worse, come home to evidence they'd been there, empty food containers, things moved around, my closet clearly rifled through. They had keys. Of course they had keys. One evening, I tried talking to James about it. "Honey, don't you think it's a bit strange that your mom and sister just come in whenever they want?" He barely looked up from his phone. "They're family, Maya. You're being dramatic, just calm down." But I couldn't calm down. Not when I found them going through my personal papers one afternoon, giggling over my diary from college that they'd discovered in a box I hadn't unpacked yet. "We need to talk," I said firmly, my hands shaking slightly. "This isn't okay. You can't just come into our home without asking. You can't go through our things." Linda's face crumpled instantly. Tears sprang to her eyes like someone had turned on a faucet. "How dare you," she wailed. "After everything we've done to welcome you into our family. I knew you were too good for us, with your fancy background." As if on cue, James walked in. He took in the scene, his mother sobbing, Rachel glaring at me, and me standing there in shock. "What did you do?" he demanded, rushing to his mother's side. "She's trying to keep us away from you," Linda cried into his shoulder. "She says we're not welcome here anymore." "That's not what I started," but James cut me off. "How could you treat them like this? They're my family." After they left, James turned on me. His face was hard in a way I'd never seen before. "You need to fix this," he said. "Buy them something nice, really nice, and apologize." The next day, I went shopping after work. I bought Linda a designer handbag she'd been hinting about, and Rachel a pair of expensive boots. My hands felt dirty as I wrapped them. When I delivered the gifts to their house, they accepted them with smug smiles. "We knew you'd come around," Linda said, not even looking at me as she examined the handbag. "These will do," Rachel added, trying on the boots. That night, James finally spoke to me again. "See, was that so hard?" he asked, kissing my cheek. But something had changed. Something I couldn't quite put my finger on yet. After the boundary incident, things got worse in ways I hadn't imagined possible. Linda and Rachel turned gift demanding into an art form. Every minor holiday became an occasion for expectations. "Maya, you know it's National Sisters' Day next week," Rachel would text. "I saw this beautiful Gucci bag. It's the anniversary of when I first held James as a baby," Linda would announce. "I think a spa weekend would be appropriate to mark the occasion." The requests were endless: Mother's Day, birthday, Christmas, Easter, Valentine's Day, Labor Day, Memorial Day, even Groundhog Day became an excuse. When I hesitated about buying Linda a $500 scarf for Arbor Day, she burst into tears during family dinner. "I guess some people just don't understand family loyalty," she sniffled, while Rachel patted her back. "Even after we've welcomed her so warmly." "Maya," James said later that night, "why do you have to be so difficult? They're your family now too." "But James, don't you think this is getting out of hand? Last week your mom wanted a designer watch because it was National Ice Cream Day. He just shrugged. If you can afford it, why not help family? As if the situation wasn't stressful enough, Kyle, Rachel's 15-year-old son, started showing up at our apartment more frequently. At first, I tried to be understanding. All teenagers go through difficult phases, right? But Kyle took teenage attitude to new heights. One evening, I spent hours making my grandmother's special lasagna recipe. Kyle took one bite and pushed the plate away. "This is garbage," he declared. "Mom says you probably can't cook because you grew up with servants doing everything for you." I gripped my fork tighter. "Kyle, that's not appropriate." "Whatever," he cut me off. "I need $60 for the movies with my friends." When I refused, he kicked the kitchen chair. "You're loaded. Stop being such a miser. Mom says you're just playing poor to feel superior." That night, I tried talking to James about Kyle's behavior. We were getting ready for bed, and I was hoping he'd finally see reason. "Honey, Kyle was really disrespectful today. Could you maybe talk to him?" James didn't even look up from his phone. "You need to handle it yourself. Think of it as practice. We'll have our own kids someday. You need to learn how to deal with these situations." The next day, Kyle showed up again, loudly demanding money for a new video game. When I said no, he sprawled across our couch, turned the TV volume up to maximum, and started making pointed comments about fake humble rich people. I looked at my husband, hoping for support, but he just walked out of the room, leaving me alone with his smirking nephew. In that moment, standing in my own living room while a teenager openly disrespected me, I felt more alone than I ever had before. 2 years. It's amazing how much can change in 2 years. Or maybe how much you can convince yourself that things will get better if you just try hard enough, be patient enough, give enough. "I'm going to visit Mom and Dad this weekend," I told James over breakfast one morning. "Want to come?" He barely glanced up from his phone. "Can't. Promised Mom and Dad I'd help them with some stuff around the house." The drive to my parents' house was peaceful. Mom made my favorite lasagna, Dad told his terrible dad jokes, and for a few hours, I felt like myself again. Like the Maya who used to know exactly who she was and what she wanted. But life has a way of shattering peace into a million pieces. When I opened the door to our apartment Sunday evening, the stench hit me first: stale beer and pizza, and something worse. Empty cans littered every surface. Cigarette butts floated in half-empty solo cups. Pizza boxes made a greasy tower on my coffee table. And there, sprawled across my living room like they owned it, were Kyle and 5 other teenagers, passed out among the wreckage of what had clearly been one hell of a party. "Get up," I shouted, my voice shaking with rage. "All of you, out. Now." The teenagers startled awake, scrambling to gather their things. All except Kyle, who stretched lazily and looked at me with that familiar smirk. Why should I leave? I live here now. I felt my blood pressure rising. "Excuse me?" "Had a fight with Mom and Grandma," he said, reaching for a half-empty beer can. "Decided this was better than their rules. Uncle James said I could crash here. We rent this apartment, we may have problems," I said through gritted teeth. "Give me your keys. Now." Kyle laughed. Actually laughed. "Rent this apartment? That's funny. This is Uncle James's apartment. Has been since Great-Grandpa left it to him." The room started spinning. "What are you talking about?" "The apartment. It's his. Always has been. Got it when Great-Grandpa died 5 years ago. Everyone knows that." I couldn't speak, couldn't breathe. 2 years of rent payments. Every time I'd suggested putting the lease in my name, every time he'd dodged the question, every time he'd quickly hidden his phone when making the rent transfer. It had all been a lie. I must have looked like I was about to collapse, because Kyle's whole demeanor changed. The cocky teenager disappeared, replaced by someone who looked almost sympathetic. "Look," he said, awkwardly patting my shoulder, "there's something else you should know." He pulled out his phone, fidgeting with it. I'd been recording some of their conversations. Started doing it when they were talking shit about me, but, well, they talk about you a lot too. James's laugh came through the speaker first. That laugh I used to love. It's perfect, he was saying. $3,000 a month, straight into my pocket. She doesn't even question it. My stomach churned as Kyle played recording after recording. Each one worse than the last. Keep talking about family loyalty, Rachel was saying. She'll cave every time. Got a new Prada bag out of her last week. Just make sure you get her pregnant soon, Linda's voice again. Once there's a baby, her daddy will have to buy you two a house. No way he'll let his grandchild live in an apartment. But the worst was yet to come. Kyle hesitated before playing the next one. She's such an idiot, James's voice, slightly slurred. Can't even satisfy me in bed. Thank God for Amanda, and Julie. And what's her name from accounting? Just be careful, honey, Linda again. Don't let Maya catch you. At least not until we've squeezed every penny we can out of her. The phone slipped from my numb fingers. Kyle caught it. Could you? My voice cracked. Could you send those to me? He nodded, quickly tapping on his phone. I heard the notification sounds on mine as the files came through. Kyle stood up, gathering his things. At the door, he turned back. I'm sorry, he said quietly. They're all snakes, you know? Always have been, even Mom. He shrugged. Guess that's why they hate me so much. I can't pretend like they do. The door closed behind him with a soft click, leaving me alone in the trash department. Alone with the truth about my marriage. About my husband. About the past 2 years of my life. I didn't bother cleaning up the mess in the apartment. Let it be a perfect metaphor for my marriage, a beautiful facade hiding absolute garbage underneath. Instead, I got in my car and drove straight to Linda and Tom's house, where I knew they'd all be having their Sunday family dinner. They were all there, exactly as I'd pictured them, James, Linda, Tom, and Rachel, gathered around the dining table like some Norman Rockwell painting of family unity. The scene made me sick. Maya. Linda's fake smile appeared instantly. We weren't expecting you. How was your parents' house? I ignored her completely, fixing my eyes on James. Show me the rental agreement for our apartment. The room went silent. James's fork paused halfway to his mouth. What? The rental agreement, the lease. Show it to me. He recovered quickly, plastering on that charming smile I'd once loved. Oh, honey, you know Mr. Johnson doesn't do formal contracts. We've known each other for years. Mr. Johnson doesn't exist, I cut him off. The apartment belongs to you. Always has. Linda jumped in quickly, her voice high and nervous. Maya, dear, would you like some pot roast? I tried that recipe you mentioned. Shut up, Linda. My voice was ice cold. They all stared at me in shock. I'd never spoken to any of them like that before. James, what have you been doing with my $3,000 every month for the past 2 years? He chuckled, but I could see sweat breaking out on his forehead. Come on, Maya, it's not a big deal. So I own the apartment, what difference does it make? We're married. What difference? I pulled out my phone. Let's see what difference it makes. The color drained from their faces as James's voice filled the room. It's perfect. $3,000 a month, straight into my pocket. She doesn't even question it. I played recording after recording. Their own voices condemned them. The plotting, the manipulation, the mockery. James's boasts about his mistresses. Linda and Rachel's schemes for extracting gifts. Their plans for getting me pregnant to secure more money from my father. When I finally stopped the playback, you could have heard a pin drop. James was ghost white. Rachel looked like she might throw up. Linda's carefully maintained makeup couldn't hide her terror. I'm divorcing you, I said to James, my voice steady. Expect the papers this week. If you try to contact me for anything other than the divorce proceedings, these recordings go public. I'm sure the business community would love to hear how you scammed your wife out of $72,000. I turned and walked out, their protests falling on deaf ears. I drove back to the apartment, his apartment, and packed my things methodically, efficiently. By sunset, my car was loaded, and I was on my way to my parents' house. Mom and Dad were still up when I arrived. One look at my face, and they knew something was terribly wrong. I told them everything, showing them the recordings. Dad's face grew darker with each revelation. "I'll handle this," he said when I finished, and he did. James was fired the next day, and Dad made sure his reputation in the business world was thoroughly destroyed. The divorce proceedings were quick. James tried to fight it at first, but the recordings changed everything. The judge was particularly interested in the financial fraud aspect. James walked away with nothing but his apartment and his ruined reputation. 3 months later, I was back at headquarters, throwing myself into work, slowly rebuilding my life. That's when I got a text from Kyle. We met for coffee. He looked different, more mature, less angry. I got a job at the car wash, he told me. Moved out of Mom's house after they found out I was the one who gave you the recordings. Best decision I ever made. I could help you, I offered. Get you a position at the company. He shook his head, smiling slightly. Thanks, but I need to do this on my own. Clean slate, you know? Besides, I'm saving up for community college. I understood completely. Sometimes the only way forward is to leave everything behind and build something new, something true, from the ground up. That night, I stood in my new apartment, my actual rental, with a real lease in my name, and looked at myself in the mirror. The woman looking back at me wasn't the same person who fell for James's charm 2 years ago. She was stronger, wiser, and finally, genuinely free. I picked up my phone and deleted their numbers one by one. The last light of day caught the diamond on my ring finger, my grandmother's ring now, not the one James had given me, and scattered into 1,000 points of light. Outside my window, the city was coming alive with evening energy, full of possibilities and new beginnings. I was ready for mine. My name is Brittany, and I often think about how different my life could have been if my mom hadn't gotten sick. She passed away when I was 6, and that's when everything changed. Our house used to be full of her laughter, and the photos of our happy family covered every wall. Dad took it really hard. For months, he barely spoke, just went to work and came back home, where I tried my best to be quiet and not bother him. I didn't really understand death back then. I kept asking when Mom would come back from heaven. Dad would just hug me tight and say nothing. Then he met Sandra at some work event. She started coming over for dinner, and I noticed Dad smiling more. I guess that's why I didn't say anything when, one by one, Mom's photos started disappearing from the walls, replaced by new ones with Sandra in them. Brittany, Sandra, and I have something to tell you, Dad said one evening. They sat me down in our living room, and I remember playing with the hem of my dress, feeling nervous. Sandra and I are getting married. She's going to live with us and be your new mom. You'll see, everything will be wonderful. But it wasn't wonderful. As soon as they got back from their honeymoon, Sandra started changing things. She rearranged all the furniture, repainted the walls, and set up what she called house rules. Brittany, your room is a mess again, she'd say every morning. A young lady should keep her space tidy. And please keep your voice down when you're playing, I have a headache. I always had to help with chores, even though I was just 6. When I complained to Dad, he'd just say, listen to Sandra, honey. She knows what's best for you. One day, I overheard them arguing in their bedroom. I pressed my ear against the door, trying to make out the words. She's just not adjusting well, John, Sandra was saying. Maybe it would be better if she lived with your mother? She's always saying how much she misses having family around. No, Dad's voice was quiet. I promised Sarah, I promised her before I swore I'd take care of Brittany. And there's the money she left for Brittany's college. I gave my word it would go to her education. I didn't know it then, but things were about to get even harder. A year later, Sandra got pregnant, and everything changed again. Dad was over the moon, and Sandra couldn't stop talking about how she was finally going to have her own child. Those words hurt more than any chore or rule she'd ever given me. Because that's what I was to her, someone else's child. Not her own. Never her own. When Emma was born, I was 8 years old. I remember standing in the hospital hallway with Dad, peering through the nursery window at my new baby sister. She was so tiny, wrapped in a pink blanket, and Dad couldn't stop smiling. "You're a big sister now, Brittany," he said proudly. "You'll help take care of Emma, won't you?" I nodded eagerly, not understanding what that really meant. But I found out pretty quickly when they brought Emma home. Sandra wasted no time in turning me into her personal assistant. "Brittany, bring me fresh diapers. Brittany, wash these bottles. Brittany, hold Emma while I make a phone call." The demands never stopped. By the time I was 9, I knew how to change diapers, prepare baby formula, and cook simple baby food. While other kids my age were playing outside after school, I was mashing bananas and stirring rice cereal for Emma. "But I want to go to Sarah's birthday party," I remember pleading one Saturday. "Emma needs you here," Sandra said firmly. "She's teething and fussy. Besides, someone needs to clean up the mess she made in the playroom." As Emma grew, so did my responsibilities. I had to watch her constantly, making sure she didn't fall while learning to walk or put dangerous things in her mouth. Meanwhile, Emma was showered with attention and gifts. Every tantrum was rewarded with a new toy or treat. When she turned 4, Emma realized she could get me in trouble whenever she wanted. And boy, did she use that power. One time, she deliberately spilled her juice all over her new dress, then ran crying to Sandra. "Brittany pushed me," she wailed. I spent that weekend grounded in my room. Another time, she broke her expensive musical toy and blamed me. "Brittany was playing with it when it broke," she claimed. It didn't matter that I was doing homework at the time, I lost my allowance for a month to pay for a replacement. The worst was when she cut up her own party dress with scissors, then hid the scissors in my backpack. Sandra found them during one of her room inspections. "How could you be so jealous?" Sandra yelled at me. "Do you know how much that dress cost?" But I didn't, I tried to explain. "Go to your room," Dad interrupted. "We'll discuss your punishment later." Emma stood in the doorway, smirking at me as I walked past. She'd learned early that she could get away with anything, while I'd get blamed for everything. Grandma Rose was my only escape from the madness at home. Every weekend I spent at her house felt like stepping into a different world, one where I could just be a kid. She lived in a cozy house filled with the smell of fresh-baked cookies and unconditional love. "Look at you, skin and bones," she'd say, loading my plate with pancakes. "That woman's got you running around like Cinderella." Unlike at home, at Grandma's house, I could laugh as loud as I wanted and didn't have to watch my every step. When Emma visited with me once, she quickly learned that her usual tricks wouldn't work there. "But I want ice cream before dinner," Emma had whined, stomping her feet. "Young lady," Grandma said firmly, "in this house, we eat our dinner first. And there's no rewards for tantrums." Emma never came back after that. "Grandma's house is boring," she told our parents. What she meant was that Grandma's house had rules that applied to everyone equally. Then came the day that changed everything. Emma had thrown a particularly dramatic fit about doing her homework, and Grandma happened to be visiting. "John," Grandma said to Dad, her voice stern, "that child is terribly spoiled. Sandra, you need to handle this better. You're raising a little tyrant." Sandra's face turned red. "How dare you criticize my parenting? You have no right." "I have every right when I see my granddaughters being treated so differently," Grandma shot back. "Look at what you're doing to Brittany." That night, I heard more shouting from downstairs. Sandra was crying, saying she wouldn't tolerate such disrespect. Dad, as usual, took her side. The next day, Sandra announced that we would no longer be visiting Grandma Rose. "But that's not fair," I protested. "Life isn't fair," Sandra snapped. "And if I catch you trying to contact her, you'll be grounded until college." College. That word became my lifeline during the next couple of years. I threw myself into studying, counting down the days until graduation. Mom had left money for my education. I'd overheard Dad talking about it enough times. That money was my ticket out. Then came graduation day. I was still in my cap and gown when Dad and Sandra sat me down for a serious talk. About college, Dad started, not meeting my eyes. "We've decided to save that money for Emma's education instead." The world stopped. "What?" "Your sister has such bright prospects," Sandra added smoothly. "And you, well, you're more suited for practical work." Something inside me snapped. For the first time in my life, I screamed. "That's my money. Mom left it for me." "You promised her, Dad. You're just a liar." "You ungrateful girl," Dad shouted, his face red. "After everything we've done for you. Get out. Tomorrow you can start your adult life somewhere else." I didn't wait for tomorrow. I ran upstairs, threw some clothes and essentials into my backpack, grabbed the hidden photo of Mom, and walked out. My friend Jenny had always said I could stay with her family if things got bad, and now things had gotten as bad as they could get. Life as a waitress wasn't what I'd dreamed of doing after high school, but it paid the bills, barely. I started at the Silver Spoon, a busy downtown restaurant, working double shifts whenever I could. My feet ached every night, and I smelled like French fries and burger grease, but at least I was free. Jenny's parents were amazing, letting me stay with them for those first few months. But I knew I couldn't impose forever. That's when I met Maria, another waitress at the restaurant, who was looking for a roommate. "The apartment's tiny," she warned me, "and the neighbors are loud, but it's cheap." She wasn't kidding about tiny. Our shared apartment could barely fit 2 beds and a couch. But it was ours, and neither of us had to answer to anyone else. We worked the same shifts, shared grocery bills, and somehow made it work. "Any plans for school?" Maria would ask sometimes, as we counted our tips after closing. I'd just shake my head. With rent, utilities, and food, I could barely save anything. College felt like a distant dream that had died the night I left home. Then, on a random Tuesday afternoon, my phone rang. I almost dropped the coffee pot I was holding when I saw the number. "Brittany, sweetheart, I've been trying to track you down. How's college going?" My throat tightened. "I'm not in college, Grandma." "What do you mean?" "Your father had Sarah's money set aside." I found myself telling her everything, the fight, getting kicked out, working as a waitress. By the end, I was crying in the restaurant's break room, and Grandma was silent for so long I thought we'd lost connection. "Those miserable, selfish," she finally said, her voice shaking with anger. "Listen to me, Brittany. I'm paying for your college. No arguments." "Grandma, no, I can't let you." "You're not letting me do anything." "I'm doing it. Your mother was like a daughter to me, and I won't let them steal your future." "Have you looked at any schools?" "I could try the local university. They have evening classes." "Perfect. We'll get you enrolled for next semester." "But Brittany?" She paused. "Let's keep this between us. I don't want to deal with your father or that woman." I laughed through my tears. "Trust me, Grandma, neither do I." So that's how I became a full-time waitress and a part-time student. My days started at 5 a.m. with studying, then classes, then straight to work until closing. I'd come home exhausted, feet blistered, smelling like restaurant food, only to crack open my books again. Maria thought I was crazy. "Girl, when do you sleep?" "Sleep is for the weak," I'd joke, downing my 3rd cup of coffee. But for the first time since I'd left home, I felt like I was moving forward. Every test I passed, every paper I turned in, felt like a small victory. Not just for me, but for Mom too. I might not have gotten to use her money, but I was still going to get the education she'd wanted for me. And the best part? Nobody from my family knew. They probably imagined me still serving tables, going nowhere in life. Let them think that. I was done trying to prove myself to people who'd never cared anyway. I was studying for my business management final when Emma's message popped up on Facebook. There she was, grinning beside a brand new red Mercedes, wearing designer clothes that probably cost more than my monthly rent. Look what Mom and Dad got me for my birthday. Not that you'd know anything about nice cars, huh? Still serving burgers? Must be fun watching everyone else live their best life while you're stuck being a waitress forever. The next photo was of her college acceptance letter. Got into State U. Mom and Dad are paying for everything, tuition, housing, meal plan. They even promised me a spring break trip to Europe. But hey, at least you get free fries with your shift meal, right? I stared at my textbook, then back at her message. I could have told her about my 3.9 GPA, about how I was about to graduate with honors. Instead, I clicked block user and went back to studying. 3 weeks later, I graduated with my business degree. Only Grandma was there to watch me walk across the stage, but that was all I needed. We went out for dinner afterward, at a different restaurant, of course. Back at work, things started changing. Mr. Peterson, the owner, called me into his office one morning. "Brittany, we've noticed how hard you work. How would you feel about becoming shift manager? You know this place inside and out, the staff respects you, and you've got the education for it now." That was just the beginning. 6 months later, I was promoted to floor administrator. My salary doubled, and suddenly I could afford to move out of the tiny apartment I shared with Maria. Years passed, and I kept climbing. By 30, I was running the whole place. The Silver Spoon had transformed from a regular downtown restaurant into one of the city's top dining spots. My name was on restaurant industry magazines, but my family still thought I was just a waitress. My new apartment was in one of those fancy high-rises downtown, with floor-to-ceiling windows and a view of the city. Every morning, I'd stand there with my coffee, watching the sunrise, thinking about how far I'd come from that scared teenager who ran away with just a backpack. It was a quiet Monday morning when I got the Facebook message from Mrs. Roberts, our old neighbor. We'd kept in touch over the years. She was one of the few people from my old life who'd been kind to me. She'd often slip me cookies when Sandra was being particularly harsh, and once even helped me hide my mom's photo album when Sandra wanted to throw it away. "Brittany, honey, I thought you should know. Emma's graduating next week, and she's planning something nasty. She's made reservations at the Silver Spoon, she knows you work there. She's been bragging to everyone about how she's going to have you wait on her table. Says it'll be hilarious to have her college dropout sister serve her graduation party. She's invited all her snobby friends and even some of our old neighbors. She's been telling everyone how she's going to show them what a failure you turned out to be. I thought you should know." I sat back in my leather office chair, looking out over the restaurant floor, through the one-way glass. The lunch rush was just beginning, and I watched my well-trained staff move efficiently between tables, like a perfectly choreographed dance. A slow smile spread across my face as I opened our reservation system. Sure enough, there it was, Emma Wilson, party of 15, Saturday 7 p.m., graduation celebration. She'd even added a special note requesting the best table in the house, price is no object. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. I could cancel it. One click, and their reservation would disappear. I could have Janet call with some excuse about a plumbing emergency or a double booking. But no, I had a better idea. I picked up my phone and called Grandma, who answered on the second ring. She was probably in her garden. She always kept her phone close while tending to her prized roses. "You'll never guess who's coming to dine at my restaurant," I said when she answered. "Who?" "Emma. And Dad and Sandra. They're coming to celebrate her graduation. Apparently, she specifically chose this place to humiliate her waitress sister. Mrs. Roberts just warned me about it." Grandma's voice turned sharp. Cancel their reservation. You don't need that kind of negativity in your life, Brittany. Haven't they hurt you enough? Actually, I couldn't help grinning as I looked at the framed Businesswoman of the Year award on my wall. I have a better idea. How would you like to come to dinner that night? I'll give you the best table in the house, behind the marble column by the waterfall wall. You'll be able to see everything, but they won't see you. There was a pause, then Grandma started laughing, that deep, mischievous laugh that always meant trouble when I was growing up. Oh, you devious girl. Count me in. Should I wear my pearls for the occasion? Perfect. I'll have Carlos make your favorite chocolate souffle. He's been practicing that new raspberry sauce you liked last time. I'll bring my camera, Grandma chuckled. This is going to be better than those reality TV shows you used to watch. After we hung up, I called in my assistant. Janet, clear my schedule for next Saturday evening. And make sure the staff knows I'll be handling a special table personally. Of course, Ms. Wilson. Anything else? Yes, I smiled, running my finger along the spine of my business management degree diploma hanging on the wall. Make sure we have our finest champagne chilled. And have Miguel prepare his special caviar appetizers. I have a feeling it's going to be quite a memorable night. As I looked out over my restaurant again, I couldn't help but think how perfect this was. Emma had always loved her little power plays, her attempts to humiliate me. Well, this time, she was walking right into my territory. And I was ready. Saturday evening arrived, and the restaurant was buzzing with its usual weekend energy. I watched from my office as my sister's party arrived, Emma in a designer dress that probably cost more than most people's monthly salary, Sandra in her typical overdone makeup, and Dad looking older than I remembered. They were surrounded by Emma's friends, all dressed to impress. I could see Grandma at her hidden table, pretending to read the menu while watching everything. She gave me a subtle wink when I passed by. Excuse me, Emma's loud voice carried across the restaurant. I specifically requested my sister, Brittany, as our server. Where is she? I smoothed down my tailored suit jacket and approached their table. Emma's face lit up with malicious delight when she saw me. Oh my God, everyone, this is my sister I was telling you about. She gestured at me like I was some exhibit at a zoo. Still a waitress after all these years. I mean, I just graduated from State U, and she's still carrying plates. The table erupted in laughter, led by Emma. Dad chuckled too, though he couldn't quite meet my eyes. Sandra just sat there with that superior smirk I remembered so well. Look at her clothes, Emma stage whispered to her friends. I guess that's what you can afford on a waitress's salary. I stood there in my Armani suit, letting them laugh. The irony wasn't lost on me. What can I get for you this evening? I asked professionally. Emma made a show of studying the menu. Well, since you asked, I'll have the lobster thermidor. Oh wait. She looked up with fake concern. Can you even afford to eat at a place like this? Do you know what lobster is? More forced laughter from her friends, though some were starting to look uncomfortable. And after dinner, Emma continued, her voice dripping with contempt, I want you to personally wash our dishes. I'll even give you a nice tip, maybe you can buy yourself some decent clothes for once. I could see Grandma gripping her table's edge so hard her knuckles were white. Some of the guests were whispering among themselves, clearly embarrassed by Emma's behavior. Sandra finally spoke up, her voice cold. Really, Brittany, you should be grateful Emma chose your establishment for her celebration. Though I must say, I'm surprised they hired someone like you at such a nice place. Actually, I said, my smile never wavering, I won't be able to take your order or wash your dishes tonight. Emma's face darkened. What do you mean, you won't? I want to speak to your manager right now. I'll have you fired. That won't be necessary, I said calmly. The manager is already here. Well, where are they? Emma demanded, looking around. You're looking at her. The silence that fell over the table was absolute. Emma's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. Dad's face had gone completely white, and Sandra looked like she'd swallowed something sour. That's impossible," Emma finally sputtered. "You're lying. You're just a waitress." "Actually," came a familiar voice, "she's not just the manager. She owns 30% of this restaurant now." Grandma rose from her hidden table and walked over, her heels clicking on the marble floor. The look she gave Dad could have frozen hell over. "While you were busy spoiling one daughter and crushing the other, I put Brittany through college. She worked here as a waitress during the day and studied business management at night. Every single success she has, she earned herself." Emma jumped up, her face red. "That's not fair. You're lying. She's nothing but a successful businesswoman who owns part of one of the city's most prestigious restaurants," Grandma cut in. "Who bought her own luxury apartment while you're still living off Daddy's money." "Is that what you were going to say?" Dad finally found his voice. "Mom, Don't you dare, Mom me, John Wilson," Grandma snapped. "You let that woman turn you against your own daughter. You gave away Brittany's college money her mother left specifically for her. Well, guess what? I'm making things right. I've already changed my will. Everything I own goes to Brittany. Every penny." Sandra shot up from her chair. "You can't do that. Emma is your granddaughter too." "Emma has had everything handed to her on a silver platter her entire life," Grandma replied coldly. "She doesn't need my money, though from what I've seen tonight, she could use some basic human decency." Emma completely lost it. She grabbed her wine glass and hurled it across the table, shattering plates and sending food flying. "This isn't fair. You're all just jealous of me." "Security," I called calmly. 2 men in black suits appeared instantly. "Please escort these people out." "You can't throw us out," Sandra screamed. "Do you know who we are?" "Yes, I do," I replied. "You're trespassers causing a disturbance in my restaurant. Leave now, or I'll call the police and press charges for the damage to my property." Emma tried to grab another plate, but one of the security guards caught her arm. Dad just stood there, looking lost, as they were all led to the door. "Brittany," he called back weakly. "Please, can we talk?" I turned my back and walked away. Over the next few months, he tried everything, calls, emails, even showing up at the restaurant once. I had security turn him away. That was 5 years ago. The Silver Spoon is now the top-rated restaurant in the city, and I've opened 2 more locations. Grandma kept her word about the will, though thankfully she's still going strong at 75, tending her garden and coming to the restaurant every Sunday for her chocolate soufflé. Last week, I got another message from Emma. Something about how she's changed and wants to make amends. I did what I always do with messages from that part of my life, hit delete and went back to work. Some chapters are better left closed. From the moment I could understand things, it was clear that my older brother Tommy was the golden child, and I was just there. The girl, the afterthought. "Nicole, make sure you're home by 3:30 to help your brother with his lunch," Mom would say almost every morning before school. I was 12, Tommy was 15, and apparently, making a sandwich was too difficult for the family prodigy. "But Mom, I wanted to join the art club after school," I'd plead, knowing it was useless. "Your brother has football practice. He needs proper nutrition. You know how important that is for him." She'd give me that look, the one that said the discussion was over before it began. Meanwhile, Tommy would be sprawled on the couch, his latest iPhone in hand, a birthday gift that made my hand-me-down flip phone feel like a relic from another century. "Yeah, Nikki," he'd smirk, not even looking up from his screen, "be a good sister." Dad was even worse about it. "Nicole, this is good practice for when you're a wife," he'd say, as if that was the pinnacle of what I could aspire to. A woman needs to know how to take care of her family. Every day was the same routine. I'd rush home from school, throw together whatever Tommy wanted to eat, iron his clothes for the next day, and try to squeeze in my homework between chores. While I was doing all this, Tommy would be at one of his many after-school activities: football, debate club, computer programming classes. Mom and Dad made sure he had every opportunity available. The only person who seemed to really see me, was Grandma Rose. Her old Victorian house on the other side of town became my sanctuary. Every weekend I'd bike over there, pedaling fast through the tree-lined streets until I saw her distinctive wraparound porch come into view. "There's my girl," she'd call out from her garden, her silver hair gleaming in the sun. Inside her house, there was no hierarchy, no golden child. Just warmth, cookies, and the kind of love that didn't come with conditions. Grandma Rose's house was like something out of an old movie, all creaky floorboards, carved wooden banisters, and rooms full of fascinating treasures. Sure, the wallpaper was peeling in places, and some of the windows stuck when you tried to open them, but I loved every imperfect inch of it. It felt more like home than our pristine suburban house ever did. What made it special wasn't just the building itself, but how Grandma treated us when we were there. Whether it was Christmas, birthdays, or just a regular weekend visit, Tommy and I always got the same treatment. Same size cookies, same loving hugs, same thoughtful gifts. It drove Tommy absolutely crazy. I'll never forget the day it all came to a head. It was Tommy's 16th birthday, and Grandma had gotten us both new tablets, nice ones, but identical. Tommy took one look at his and exploded. "Are you kidding me?" He stood up, face red with anger. "Nicole gets the exact same thing as me? On my birthday?" Grandma Rose sat calmly in her antique armchair, hands folded in her lap. "Tommy, dear, I love you both equally. But that's not fair," he was practically shouting now. "Mom and Dad always give me better stuff. They know I deserve it. I'm the one with the grades, the sports achievements, the future. Nicole just exists." I felt like I'd been slapped, but before I could say anything, Grandma Rose stood up. She wasn't a tall woman, but in that moment, she seemed to tower over all of us. Thomas Michael Parker, her voice was quiet but sharp as a knife. "You will not speak about your sister that way in my house. Or anywhere else, for that matter. I will not allow it." Tommy stormed out, slamming the front door so hard that Grandma's collection of china teacups rattled in their cabinet. I expected that to be the end of it, but it wasn't. The next day, Grandma showed up at our house unannounced. I sat at the top of the stairs, listening to her talking to Mom and Dad in the living room. Her voice carried clearly, "The way you're raising these children is unacceptable. The favoritism needs to stop." "Mom, we're doing what's best for both of them," my mother tried to argue. "Really? Is that what you call it?" Grandma's voice was cold. "Well, if you want my continued financial support for their upbringing, things need to change." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Later that night, I overheard Mom and Dad talking in their bedroom. "We can't afford to lose her money," Mom was saying. "We need it for Tommy's college fund, for all his activities." "I know," Dad sighed. "We'll have to play along. Give Nicole some stuff too. Keep your mother happy." Suddenly, everything changed. Within a week, I was enrolled in the piano lessons I'd been begging for since I was 10. A new iPhone appeared on my bedside table. My parents started asking about my day at dinner. The next time I visited Grandma, she was tending to her roses in the garden. She looked up at me with a knowing smile. "You know, dear," she said, pruning shears in hand, "I get detailed reports of how every penny of my support money is spent. Your parents seem to be making much better choices lately, don't you think? It's a strange feeling when you realize your parents' love comes with conditions." Yes, they were going through the motions, asking about my day, buying me things, showing up at my school events, but their hearts weren't in it. Their eyes would still light up differently when Tommy walked into the room. I learned to accept it. At least now I had my piano lessons and didn't have to spend every afternoon being Tommy's personal maid. Sometimes acceptance is easier than hoping for change. When Tommy graduated high school and got accepted to State University 3 hours away, you'd think he'd won the Nobel Prize. Mom and Dad threw this huge party, invited all the relatives, made speeches about their brilliant son. Grandma Rose sat in the corner, watching it all with those knowing eyes of hers. For the first few months, all we heard during family dinners was how well Tommy was doing at college. He'd call home weekly, telling stories about his classes, his professors, his bright future in business. Mom and Dad would put him on speakerphone, beaming with pride. Then came the letter. I was in my senior year of high school when Dad stormed into the house waving an official-looking envelope, his face purple with rage. Tommy was on academic probation, at risk of being expelled. Turns out all those study sessions he'd been talking about were actually parties. He'd barely attended any classes. Grandma Rose showed up the next day. I'd never seen her so angry. If you don't get that boy in line, she told my parents, her voice like steel, don't expect me to pay for another college when he gets himself kicked out of this one. And believe me, no other school will take him with these grades. The threat of losing Grandma's money sent my parents into a panic. They drove to State University that very weekend. I don't know exactly what they said to Tommy, but when he called the following week, he sounded different. Subdued. For once in his life, Tommy had to face actual consequences. By some miracle, Tommy managed to pull his grades up enough to stay in school. He graduated 4 years later and decided to stay in that city, taking a job at a local company. Meanwhile, I'd gotten into the business management program at City College, just 20 minutes from home. Grandma Rose paid my tuition too, though my parents barely seemed to notice I was in college at all. When I made the dean's list, the only celebration was a phone call with Grandma. 4 years flew by, and suddenly I was graduating with honors. Grandma was there, of course, beaming proudly. My parents showed up too, though they spent most of the ceremony talking about how Tommy was doing at his new job. I didn't care anymore. I had my degree, and better yet, I had a job offer from Parker & Associates, one of the biggest marketing firms in town. When Grandma Rose passed away, it felt like the world stopped spinning for a while. The day of her funeral, I couldn't stop staring at her garden, wondering who would tend to her beloved roses now. The reading of the will was held in her attorney's office, a week after the funeral. Tommy flew in from out of state, wearing an expensive suit that somehow still made him look like a kid playing dress-up. Mom and Dad sat between us, as if they were still needed as buffers after all these years. Mrs. Rose Parker's estate, the attorney began, adjusting his glasses, is to be divided between her 2 grandchildren, Nicole and Thomas Parker. He paused, looking at both of us. The division is to be determined by their own choice. One will receive the house, and the other will receive a sum of $500,000. The first choice goes to Thomas, as the elder grandchild. Tommy actually snorted. Is this some kind of joke? He looked around the room. You really expect me to want that musty old house? No, I'll take the money, I've got plans. I'm going to start my own business, show everyone what I can do. Nicole can have the old lady house with all its weird smells and creaky floors. I sat there, my heart pounding. The house, Grandma's house. My sanctuary all those years. I'll take it, I said quietly, but firmly. The next few years passed in a blur of hard work and determination. At Parker & Associates, I threw myself into every project, every challenge. My team's sales numbers kept breaking records, and within 3 years, I was promoted to head of sales. The salary increases that came with my success went straight into renovating Grandma's house. I took my time with the renovation, carefully preserving the house's character while modernizing everything else. New wiring, new plumbing, a state-of-the-art kitchen that still somehow felt like it belonged in a Victorian home. The garden I did myself, learning everything I could about roses, and continuing Grandma's legacy. Mom and Dad came to visit once it was done. I watched their faces as they walked through the restored rooms, saw how their eyes widened at the crown molding, the hardwood floors, the gourmet kitchen. This is incredible. Mom ran her hand along the marble countertop. Dad nodded, then sighed. It's a shame Tommy didn't take the house. This would have been perfect for him and his new wife. And there it was. Some things never change. Speaking of which, Mom added, trying to sound casual, have you heard from your brother lately? I hadn't, of course. None of us had been invited to his wedding 6 months ago. He'd gotten married in his wife's hometown, surrounded by her family and their mutual friends. Mom had shown me pictures she'd found on Facebook, Tommy in a tux, his new wife Rebecca beaming in designer white. The doorbell rang on a Sunday afternoon while I was pruning Grandma's roses. I wasn't expecting anyone, so I took my time wiping the dirt from my hands before heading to the door. When I opened it, I nearly dropped my gardening gloves. There stood Tommy, looking nothing like the confident businessman he'd been pretending to be on social media. Beside him stood a woman I recognized from the wedding photos, Rebecca, his wife. She wore designer clothes and too much makeup, her eyes scanning my home like she was conducting an inspection. Tommy gave me an apologetic look. Can we talk privately for a minute, Nikki? We stepped into Grandma's old study, now my home office. Tommy closed the door behind us and turned to me with an expression I'd never seen before, desperation. I need your help, sis, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. The business, it's not good. We're about to lose everything. We had to give up our apartment, and... He ran his hands through his hair. Could we stay here for a while? Just until things turn around? I stood there, stunned. Tommy had never asked me for anything before, unless you count all those years of demanded lunches and ironed clothes. Please, he added, and for the first time since we were kids, I saw my brother instead of my parents' golden child. Okay, I heard myself say. But just temporarily. The next morning, my doorbell rang again. This time it was Mom and Dad, practically bouncing with excitement. We came as soon as Tommy told us. Mom rushed past me to embrace Rebecca. Oh, sweetheart, we're so happy to finally meet you in person. For the next 2 hours, I might as well have been invisible. I served coffee, at Mom's imperious request, and listened as Rebecca charmed my parents with stories about her family's social connections and Tommy's brilliant business ventures. Nicole, Mom called out as I headed to the kitchen, be a dear and make us some lunch. Something nice, Rebecca's used to fine dining. That set the tone for the weeks that followed. I'd come home from long days at work to find Tommy and Rebecca lounging in my living room, expecting dinner to magically appear. Aren't you going to start cooking? Rebecca asked one evening, not looking up from her phone. We're starving. I just worked a 12-hour day, I replied, dropping my briefcase. Why don't you cook something? Rebecca's head snapped up, her eyes narrowing. Excuse me? You should be grateful we let you stay here at all. The least you could do is cook decent meals. I turned to Tommy, confused. He pulled me into the study again. Look, he whispered urgently, Rebecca thinks this is my house. She thinks I'm letting you stay here out of kindness. She comes from money, she's used to a certain lifestyle. If she finds out I'm basically bankrupt, his voice cracked. She'll leave me. I stared at my brother, this man who'd had everything handed to him his whole life, now reduced to begging me to lie to his wife. Fine, I said finally. I won't tell her. But you two need to start treating me with respect in my own home. No more demands, no more attitude. Deal? Deal, Tommy nodded quickly. Thank you, Nikki. I mean it. True to his word, Tommy's demands for home-cooked meals stopped. Instead, I'd come home to find takeout containers from the city's finest restaurants scattered across my kitchen counter. Rebecca would be lounging on my sofa, picking up pad thai or sushi, barely acknowledging my presence. I didn't ask questions. Honestly, I was just relieved not to be playing chef after long days at the office. I settled into my own routine, grabbing dinner from the casual cafe near work. The arrangement seemed to be working, they stayed out of my way, I stayed out of theirs. Then came the phone call. Nicole? Mom's voice had that tone, the one she used when she was about to demand something. We need to discuss the restaurant bills. Tommy told us she'd cover the expenses at the end of the month. It's nearly $3,000. I nearly choked on my coffee. Excuse me? Well, you can't expect them to starve, Mom continued, as if this was the most reasonable thing in the world. Tommy said you agreed to handle their food expenses since they're going through a rough patch. I've been putting it all on my credit card. I'll text you the account details for the transfer. I hung up. My hands were shaking as I pulled up my text messages and sent one to Tommy. Come to me, now. He must have heard something in those 2 words, because he appeared in my study within 15 minutes. Rebecca was out shopping, with whose money, I didn't want to know. Care to explain why Mom thinks I'm paying for your 5-star takeout habit? I asked, my voice deadly quiet. Tommy's face did that thing it used to do when we were kids, and he got caught in a lie, a quick flash of guilt before the excuses started flowing. Nikki, you have to understand. Understand what? That you're stealing from our parents now too? I'm not stealing, he ran his hands through his hair. I just borrowed. I was going to pay them back when things turned around. But Rebecca, she has certain expectations. If she knew how bad things really are. Stop, I held up my hand. I've heard enough about Rebecca's expectations. This ends now. I'll figure something out, he promised, his eyes pleading. Just give me more time, don't tell Rebecca, please, Nikki. I've never asked you for anything. Never asked me for anything? I stood up, my voice rising. Are you kidding me? My entire childhood was spent catering to your needs. And now you're living in my house, lying to your wife, and scamming our parents. I know, he held up his hands. I'm sorry, really. Just one more chance. I'll handle the restaurant bills. I promise. I stared at my brother, this man who had everything handed to him his whole life, now reduced to begging his little sister to keep his house of cards from collapsing. Fine, I said finally. One more chance. But I mean it, Tommy. Figure out your own food situation. And I'm not paying a cent of those bills. Life fell into an uncomfortable routine over the next 2 months. I'd go to work, manage my department, come home to find my house looking like a hurricane had swept through it, and spend my evenings cleaning up after Tommy and Rebecca. They seemed to exist in their own bubble of leisure, lunches with our parents, dinners at expensive restaurants, shopping trips I didn't want to know the details of. Then came the day that changed everything. Tommy had left early, muttering something about a business meeting. I came home from work earlier than usual, having wrapped up a major sales presentation, looking forward to a quiet evening with a glass of wine. Rebecca was waiting for me in the living room, perched on the edge of the sofa like a queen about to deliver a royal decree. We need to talk, she announced, gesturing to the armchair across from her. Sit. I raised an eyebrow at her tone, but sat down anyway. Might as well hear whatever this was about. I've been patient, Rebecca began, examining her manicured nails. I've watched you swagger around this house like you own the place, making everyone uncomfortable. But enough is enough. I blinked. Excuse me? From now on, you'll pay us $2,000 a month in rent. That's more than fair, given the neighborhood. She smiled tightly. And you'll resume cooking and cleaning duties. The state of this house is embarrassing, and since you're the tenant. I couldn't help it. I started laughing. Not a polite chuckle, but full-blown, tears in my eyes laughter. Rebecca's face darkened. What exactly is so amusing? I wiped my eyes, trying to catch my breath. Rebecca, honey, there seems to be a misunderstanding. This is my house, I own it. Your husband is living here because I took pity on him when he came begging at my door. The color drained from her face. You're lying. Call him, I said, leaning back in my chair. Go ahead. Ask Tommy who owns this house. Her hands shaking slightly, Rebecca pulled out her phone and dialed. Tommy answered on the second ring. Darling, her voice was sharp enough to cut glass. Nicole is spinning some ridiculous story about owning the house. Tell her she's mistaken. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. She's telling the truth, Tommy's voice crackled through the speaker. It's her house. Grandma left it to her in the will. I took the money instead to start a business, but I failed. We're broke. I've been trying to find a way to tell you. Rebecca stood up so fast she knocked over her water glass. I watched as she stormed upstairs, heard drawers slamming, closet doors banging. Within 20 minutes, she was dragging her designer suitcases down my stairs. She didn't say a word as she left. The slam of the front door echoed through the house like a gunshot. The morning after Rebecca left, I was enjoying my coffee in peaceful silence when Tommy burst through the front door. His face was twisted with rage, all traces of yesterday's contrition gone. "This is all your fault," he shouted, stalking into my kitchen. "Rebecca's filing for divorce. She won't even talk to me. You had no right to tell her the truth." I set my coffee cup down carefully, remembering all the times I'd backed down from his anger over the years. Not this time. No, right? I stood up slowly. "This is my house, Tommy. The house you laughed at me for choosing. The house you said smelled like an old lady. The house you've been lying about to your wife while mooching off our parents. And you're telling me I had no right? You ruined everything." He slammed his fist on my counter. "You've always been jealous of me, haven't you? Always waiting for a chance to get back at me. Get out." My voice was quiet but firm. "Take your things and go." He stared at me for a moment, then stormed upstairs. I listened to him throwing things around in the guest room, probably breaking something expensive. I didn't care. When he came back down with his bags, he gave me one last venomous look. I had exactly 1 hour of peace before my phone rang. Mom's name flashed on the screen. "How could you do this to your brother?" She didn't even say hello. "He's devastated. He's back home with us now, crying his eyes out." "That's not my problem." "Of course it's your problem." Dad's voice now, they had me on speaker. "You need to give Tommy the house. It's the only way to save his marriage. Rebecca might come back if they have a proper home." I actually laughed. "Are you serious? You want me to give away my house because Tommy lied to his wife and ruined his business? He's your brother." Mom was practically shrieking now. "Family helps family." Really? I felt a lifetime of resentment bubbling up. Where was that family spirit when I was cooking and cleaning for Tommy as a kid? Where was it when you ignored my achievements because you were too busy praising him? The only person who ever treated me like family was Grandma, and she left this house to me. This conversation is over. 2 months later, I heard through work colleagues that Tommy's company had officially declared bankruptcy. His divorce was finalized around the same time. He was living with our parents, apparently regrouping, their favorite word for Tommy's failures. I wasn't surprised when all 3 of them showed up at my door one Sunday afternoon. Mom was clutching a casserole dish like a peace offering. Dad had that stern look he used to use when he was about to lecture me about family duty. Tommy stood behind them, trying to look pitiful. I watched them through the security camera Grandma had installed years ago. They rang the bell again and again. Mom started calling out, "Nicole, we know you're in there. We need to talk about this as a family." I picked up my phone and sent a single text to all 3 of them, "Please leave. Do not come back. This is your only warning before I call the police." They left eventually, but not before Mom left the casserole on my porch with a note about forgiveness and family obligations. I donated the casserole to the homeless shelter down the street. These days, my life is peaceful. I tend to Grandma's roses, which are blooming more beautifully than ever. My career is thriving. I made executive VP last month. I feel good, and it's all thanks to Grandma.